Olaf from Happy Dog Training, and welcome to another episode of Dog Talk. Today we're going to talk about taking your dog to the vet. And this topic is a little bit different from the other vet episodes that we had when we talked about what vets will do in general for certain conditions or so forth. This is more about preparing your dog for a vet visit. So I'm going to give you some tips and pointers on something you may want to try with your own dog so to get a bit more comfortable. And essentially, what it is, the overarching theme is going to be successive approximation towards what the vet will do. So we're getting step by step closer to what the vet will do with your dog and get your dog more comfortable with the ideas of all of it. So it's not going to be as stressful when they actually go. So let's go step by step. So the first thing obviously is going to the vet, and that means you have to get your dog in the car most likely and drive there. So the first time, it's probably not going to be a big problem the first time you go, but most dogs do not enjoy the vet. And that's understandable. Do you enjoy the dentist? Most people don't, right? So it's like going to the dentist. And your dog will not necessarily like strangers coming up and doing all kinds of stuff, and it's not going to be great for them. So the second time you'll try to go to the vet, and that's all you do with your car, putting the dog in to go to the vet, the dog will probably not be as interested as going into the car, if that's all you do with the car. So one of the tips is, or one of the really good ideas is, don't just go to the vet. So when you put your dog in the car, make sure that the ratio of going to the vet versus going someplace fun, on a walk, on a trail, or whatever, works in your favor. So your dog gambles on every car ride and more than not wins the lottery by, hey, we're having a good time. And then when he ends up going to the vet, every once in a while, they go, okay. It's not going to be a detriment to the next car ride because the likelihood of that being another vet visit is now really low. So make sure when you go into the car with your dog, it's not just going to unpleasant places or places of necessity. Make sure there is it's outweighed by places of fun. So your dog understands going in the car is generally a fun thing. Every once in a while we may end up at the vet, but it's not the predominant purpose of going into the car. Because once it becomes that, then you have to undo that because the dog's not going to be happy about it. So that's the first step. Now the next thing is, it's also a good idea to go to the vet and just sit in the waiting room. And you can go in and just tell them, hey, I'd just like to sit here a little bit with my dog if it's okay. If it's not too busy, I mean, if it's super packed, it's probably not a good idea. But if you go in a time where it's a little bit lower, you can also call them and ask them when it's a little bit less foot traffic. Like to come with my dog and maybe meet you guys and to sit in the waiting room a little bit and get them more comfortable with the environment. If you're up for it, and it's even better if you actually just make a check-in and make an appointment, and what's it going to be, $40, something like that, and make an appointment with the vet. For no other reason than just like getting there, sitting in the waiting room, getting to know the staff, getting to know the vet, saying hello to the vet, and you can just meet your dog can meet him, and it's a good experience without any exam. So don't do an exam, just like vet fee. Hello, hi, pet a little bit, let him sniff a little bit, maybe give him a cookie, ask a question you want to ask, but don't make it about an exam at this point because you haven't prepped your dog for exams. You just like want to introduce to the environment and to the vet and show, well, it's a fun place. It's no problem, they give me cookies here. Right? It's not like a big detriment to go here. So it kind of sets the tone for the next time when you probably have to do a checkup and you have a full examination or so. So you set yourself up for success doing that. So that's a good idea. Now, in terms of preparing for the vet itself, so here's a couple of things that you will experience. The first thing usually is the dog is asked to be put on, or they ask you to put your dog on a scale. It's a gigantic metal scale. It's going to make some noises. So use your pre-vet visit to go on the scale maybe a couple of times. Or if you have a scale at home or buy one, you can buy pet scales. I mean, it may not make sense for you. For me as a dog trainer, we have a scale. It's not the same type, but it's kind of like, I mean, you have to walk on, so it's not metal, but It's an approximation. So it's not a bad starting point. And you could do it at home with a metal sheet you put on the ground. Just walk on that. So you can practice these things a little bit so it's not as difficult for your dog to enter a vet office and go on the scale. You can actually hold still and to get the weight. So that's the first thing to practice. The next thing to practice are the things that the vet will actually do. So the vet may have to check between the paws. So getting your dog used to having somebody touch the paws, putting the fingers between the nails and just like rubbing there, having it in your hand, touching the nose, putting some pressure on the top of the fingers, like all these things, and just petting them and holding it a little bit. All these things help getting your dog comfortable of having his paws examined. And you have to go as slowly as necessary with your dog. So maybe in the beginning you just put your hand on it, don't move it at all. And then maybe you just start petting a little bit. And then maybe you put a thumb, between two of the paws and just hold it there and then let go again. So you successfully approximate the thing that you ultimately need to do to check for, let's say, what are called, foxtail, not between the paws. Because foxtail surgery, that's pricey. Set you back a couple of $800 or so. I had to do this with dogs. It's better to avoid that. Check them. So you get them used to having the paws handled. And so that's one thing. The other thing is brushing. Get your dog used to brushing because the vet will run his hands through and check the body. So you can also do it with your hands instead of a brush. Just go through and feel up your dog's body. Are there anything you feel that's unusual? Any kind of growth, any kind of wart, any kind of scarring, any kind of dead tissue, any kind of whatever, right? So something that just doesn't feel right, and then take a look and see what's going on there. So get your dog used to being felt up, let's just say. And then get your dogs used to having his lips raised up. So the vet will come and just push those outer lips up to look at the teeth and push the ones down to look at the teeth. And if possible, even open the mouth further and maybe even look inside. All these things are helpful if your vet can take a look and the dog's not fighting that. So it makes it easier to examine your dog and identify potential health issues. Same thing with the ears. A lot of dogs hate eardrops. But starting to massage the ears and don't play with them too much on puppies because the cartilage can get damaged and they wouldn't stand up if there are ears that would stand up. So be careful with dogs that have ears that would stand up. Don't play with those ears when they're puppies. It could damage the cartilage and then the growth develops poorly and they don't stand up, so don't do that. But once the dog's old enough and the ears are up, and you can play around with them carefully, you can touch them, you can rub them and put your hands there. I wouldn't put liquid in it at this point, hold off on that, but you can get your dog being used to having his ears examined and touched and looked inside, and maybe a little tissue and cotton swab or something pretty benign. And the dog gets used to it and gets comfortable. So that would be like an ear exam. It happens quite a bit because dogs get ear infections, even shepherds can get ear infections. And it happens, it's part of life. And then you have to give medication and have the vet examine it. If your dog doesn't hold still, well, you're going to have to sedate the dog. Price goes up. So it's worth considering if you care. So that would be some of those things. So what else? So you could, as I said, you could brush them, but you could also nail clip. If you feel comfortable, getting a good nail clipper is usually worth doing. And then every once in a while, clip your dog's nails a little bit. But know that there's inside the nail, there is a blood vessel. So if you cut too much of the nail, you're going to clip that blood vessel. It's going to bleed for like 15 minutes or so. There are things like Quick Stop or even baking soda or baking powder will kind of seal that a little bit. But it's better to not cut it quick if you can help it. It's not always possible. It's not always avoidable, but if you can help it, then avoid it. It's better for your dog. But to get used to nail clips and learn how to do that. So what you should do is if the nail is like in the position goes downwards, you should cut from the bottom or from the top. Don't cut sideways. That would be like easier for you from a holding perspective, but it's not a good idea to cut the nail sideways because you're going up more against the thicker surface and it's going to press down more. It's more resistance, harder to cut, especially with large breed dogs, can be difficult. Much easier if you come on the thinner side of the nail, top or bottom, and clip up or down. And just take off a little bit. Don't go too nuts. As long as the nails end up not touching the ground afterwards, you're in good shape anyways. Okay, so that's nail clipping. Now, there's other things in the first aid thing that we're going to discuss in the first aid podcast that's coming up about Heimlich maneuver and CPR and stuff like that and activated charcoal applications. But getting your dog used to also having maybe a syringe with just water, it could be beef broth initially, delivered by syringe into his mouth can be helpful because it allows you to execute some emergency procedures if your dog is per se comfortable having some chicken broth delivered by syringe into his mouth. If he gets used to, oh, syringe is a good thing, it's not a bad thing. Right? Now, obviously, when you give medication like that or you give other things, at that moment it won't be that tasty and you're kind of countering what you have done before. But if you mix it up enough again with the tasty stuff, your dog will probably always let you do it and take the gamble. Will it be medication this time or meat juice, right? It's again about being strategic about that. But those are a couple of things. Now, a thermometer in the butt is another thing that is very common. They have to take temperature, and that's the fastest way of doing it. So you can buy regular people thermometers with the covers, tip covers, and you can get your dog used to doing that. It's not something you should do every day, but you can get your dog used to having a temperature taken through the anus if your dog is not that comfortable getting touched by everybody all the time. Could be helpful to prepare him, so if the vet actually has to take temperature that way, they can. Well, it ultimately comes down to making a vet visit easier and less stressful to the dog. So it's about reducing the stress of your dog when you have to go. So we recommend doing preparation tasks ahead of the time so you don't struggle too much when you actually have a medical need. So you prepare yourself for the things that could potentially happen or wellness checks that will happen no matter what. And your dog can get comfortable with that. Everything becomes easier from there. So I hope that makes sense. So the other thing, now they are not so much related to your dog, but it's a good idea to educate yourself on things that will come up probably in a vet visit and understand where you stand and know why you stand there. So things that are good to know and advocate for your dog for are unnecessary vaccines. So I'm saying unnecessary, not vaccines in general, but the unnecessary ones. So let's take the core vaccines, like rabies, parvo, distemper. You gotta do those. Gotta do them. This is just like irresponsible not to vaccinate your dog against these diseases. But it doesn't mean you have to do it every year. So read the studies, and we have some of them on the website. Read the study of the Rabies Challenge Fund. There is so much information, scientific information on how long these actually work and how you establish if your dog is still protected. There's titer tests and things like that. So there are approaches that are helpful for you as a dog owner to understand before you walk into a vet office so you know how to respond to a vet who comes with suggestions around that. We should give this vaccine. We should give that vaccine. And you've never heard of it. Right? So leptospirosis, I think it's one of them. So you have vaccines that literally have, 20 cases in the United States past year. And you're living not in an area where these cases even occurred because they're usually clustered more in certain geographies and temperatures and time zones. So why would you give a vaccine for that? It's unlikely for your dog to A, encounter that, and B, what's the process of treating it? Is it difficult to treat? Is it deadly? Is it serious? Is it not so serious? All these things are worth understanding so you can decide, well, I'm going to do this vaccine, I'm not going to do that vaccine, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that. So being an informed consumer from that perspective and advocating for your dog is helpful. So I'll give you a personal example. I ended up at an emergency hospital many years ago with one of my dogs. There was a dog fight, and my dog got bitten quite a bit and needed surgery. Didn't need surgery, but needed like the wounds cleaned out and antibiotics. So it was actually not like it wasn't that bad, but it needed to be looked at because there can be infections and so it's not something you can just ignore. But we went to the vet, and obviously this happened at night, so all this stuff doesn't happen when you can just make an appointment at your regular vet during the day. These kinds of things happen in the off hours when you have to go to the emergency hospital, vet hospital. And that does not get cheaper. That gets way more expensive quickly. So my dog was in a dog fight and had a couple of puncture wounds, but that's it, right? Nothing else. We know that all the dogs involved were vaccinated against rabies, and nobody had rabies. So here we have a dog that has a couple of punctures, nothing too dramatic, but needs to be looked at. And we know it wasn't a dog fight with a dog that was also healthy. And I get a vet bill, or an estimate, I should say, for like $1,200 because they were running a blood panel on this and that. They were doing extra shots and updates on this and that. I mean, it just went down the list of things where I just go, why? Why do we need to do this? So I asked them on the blood test, why? Well, maybe this. And I mean, the answer wasn't coherent. It was really just like trying to justify a high price tag of that panel they wanted to run was like, I mean, at a regular vet, I think it's around $200. Of course, it's a vet hospital after hours, so it's $400. I mean, it's crazy. The stuff like that is complete waste of your money. But you can only know that if you go in there as an informed consumer and understand, well, what do we actually need to do to deal with a bite wound? Do we need to run a blood panel on this dog? If it's wildlife and we need to know if there's rabies potentially, yeah, well, we need to test that maybe. But if my dog's vaccinated, you shouldn't have anything. It's maybe still worth doing a test. But do I need to run a blood panel to look for other diseases? No, not if my dog's healthy. There's no point in that. So knowing what's important and knowing what's not important in a particular scenario can save you a lot of money. And also you need to advocate for your dog. So there is absolutely no point in shooting your dog up with vaccines of diseases he will never encounter because they don't occur where you live. So it is important to understand what do you need for where you live versus what do you need when you live someplace else. Something that may make sense to add to the core vaccine regimen in Georgia or in other time zones near the equator because of the heat and moisture probably makes less sense when you are in California or Seattle or Minnesota. Right? So it really depends on where you are, what vaccines and what precautions you should take and ask about and understand. So just know what you need and what you want before you walk in there. Another topic on that is food. And we have tons of podcasts and we talk about food, and we have canine nutritionist Kay Stewart on, talked about food. But veterinarians are not that educated on food. But everybody goes to the vet, thinks, oh, dog issue, dog question, vet, right? It's a completely natural way of thinking. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't the vet know? The vet should know. It's a vet. But it's not part of their curriculum to become experts on food. If you've ever met a canine nutritionist or you looked at some of those canine nutrition services that are out there, like Real Dog, Kay Stewart again, they're super detailed, they're marvelous, they're super informative. You learn so much, and it goes really deep. That's not part of a vet curriculum. It's not part of what veterinarians go to school for. So that's why there's canine nutritionists. So just know what it is that will likely happen at the vet. Prepare your dog. The conversations you can brace yourself for, you can expect to have some of the topics I mentioned. Prepare yourself for them so you are well informed. And whatever the decision is you're going to make, it's an informed decision at that point. So it's not that somebody talked you into something that may or may not make sense. It is like, no, I thought about this. This is something I'm going to do. And I'm going to do it this way. ABC, whatever. Right? So it's you've made the decision on how to approach something. and then you can have a better conversation, ask better questions too. It may actually be helpful to the treatment of your dog, and if the vet is any good, he will hopefully appreciate you actually knowing something about what's going on, asking the right questions. That should be appreciated. Right? If the vet doesn't appreciate that, well, maybe look for another vet. But it's good to know. It's good to have a base understanding of these things. It's ultimately going to benefit your dog. It's going to benefit you. It's going to benefit your wallet. Just to have an understanding of what's needed and what's not, and why. So, okay. And I believe that's all I wanted to get into in terms of taking your dog to the vet. So the preparation of some of the physical stuff and a couple of pre-visits to get the dog more comfortable and ready in the environment. All these things are super helpful of making vet visits less stressful and ultimately not that big of a deal down the line. So, yeah, I hope this was helpful. You got something out of it, and I will see you again next time. Bye.